Okay. Kamna Maori and Nisambula Vinaka Yandra. Oh, is it Yandra? No, it's just after 12. So we'll just say Bula, everyone. I'm Katerina Teaiwa. I'm a professor in Pacific Studies in the School of Culture, History and Language here in the College of Asia and the Pacific. You're in the Coombs building, the very amazing and confusing but also historical Coombs building, where a lot of work about the Pacific and Indigenous Australia has been done for decades. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for finding your way here and bearing with the fact that we had to do a bit of a room changeover from tutorials that were going on earlier. But we're so happy and pleased to have you all here with us today, and welcome to everyone on Zoom as well. It's the school holidays here in Canberra, so we also have some of our children with us. So it's nice to have a little group of young people joining us today for what is the second workshop in a series of workshops by the Oceania Working Party of the Australian Dictionary of Biography. So welcome everyone. So we have a very special workshop today, but before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we are gathered on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land, unceded lands, and I just want to pay our respects to the traditional custodians. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Canberra has a long history of Indigenous resistance to all forms of settler colonialism, and that is something that very much informs the work of the Oceania Working Party, which is focused on Pacific Islander life stories, but always in solidarity and dialogue with Aboriginal, Torres Strait Island and South Sea Islander histories, stories, issues, challenges, activism, and everything else. We can't do the work that we need to do in Pacific Studies without that solidarity. That has to come first, always. So just acknowledging that we are on stolen lands. The ANU is on stolen lands. So I just want to introduce the director of the Australian Dictionary of Biography and the Centre of Biography, who's going to say a few words before we begin our workshop and we talk to the beautiful guests that we've invited to come from Melbourne and Queensland to join us today. This workshop will be a focus on South Sea Islander and Melanesian life stories, and it will be in two parts. So the first part will be the workshop, and that will run for a couple of hours, and then we're going to have a break. And then the second part is actually going to be a little bit of a closed meeting with invited guests focusing on the work of the Oceania Working Party. So that's how we're going to run it today, and there will be a little bit of a break and some refreshments in the middle as well. But can I please introduce Melanie Nolan, Professor Melanie Nolan, who will say some words on behalf of the Australian Dictionary of Biography.
Thank you so much, Katerina. It's a privilege and an honour just to say a few words at the beginning, and to some extent it's a bit embarrassing. I'll get on to that in a moment. This workshop follows from the first workshop, which of course Lisa Hilly gave a wonderful paper which took our breath away, and she also allowed us to use her beautiful artwork on our newsletter, and we're extremely grateful to Lisa for that. I know people have come from far and wide, and I've already been introduced to some of your eminent guests, and Imelda Davies from Sydney. We've already said hello. So look, I'd just like to welcome you. I'd like to say three things briefly. I'd like to first, I suppose, acknowledge the work that Katerina has been doing and the whole impulse of this kind of workshop. Katerina is of Banaban heritage, and from this micro platform, her research is now working on macro issues, broader issues in the whole of the Blue Pacific. She is researching policy issues, criticising security forces of Australia step up in the Pacific. She's increasingly a spokesperson for climate change in the Pacific. And similarly, her determination to work on a Pacific Australian dictionary has led her to transform what was a very small Canberra group of people into a much larger online network, and it's attracting the very best of Australia, Pacific and Islander minds. And it's reflecting the depth and breadth of Australia's Pacific connection and the work that you people are doing in this area. There are 22 members on the Oceania Working Party now, Māori, South Sea Islander, Torres Strait Islander scholars from across Australia, the Pacific and America. And with wonderful assistance from Nick and Talei, I know that you people are working on a paper, Finding Australia's Missing Pacific Women, for a forthcoming collection on reframing Indigenous biography, which is coming out. So the Working Party is mentoring research assistants, developing an international research collaboration, it's nurturing ECAs, and it's working towards prestigious Pacific Australian Dictionary of Biography. And it will be a resource for all researchers in Pacific history. And the Oceania Working Party, I think, is clearly going to create something exciting in the Australia Pacific research area, and it's a wonderful and marvellous model, and we're incredibly excited about this. Secondly, the Working Party has a massive task ahead, and I can't disguise that. It's a bit embarrassing. In 2017, when I approached Katerina about chairing a ADB Oceania Working Party, we have over 13,000 entries in the ADB. Only 31 were of Pacific Island subjects, and only one was written by a Pacific Island person. So, that is the dimensions of it. I've been impressed with the enthusiasm of people involved in writing Australian Pacific biography when they've been invited, and to people, the work that's been done in Pacific and biographical subjects, despite this previous poor record. The Working Party so far has generated a list of over 200 names that it wants in the ADB, and we're keen to have more. And I know these workshops are one of the major forums in which these names are coming forward, and we will give it every support that we can possibly give. But the energy of you people is taking our breath away. The Facebook page of Pacific Biography in Australia has over 1,700 names, and particular posts are getting an audience of over 4,000. That's outreach, and that is bringing together what is a very widespread community into a tight network. And of course, Kim, I've just read your wonderful entry on Lisa Bellear, and there we are. That is an article on Melbourne-born woman, lived 1961 to 2006. She's a Numikal, I'm sorry about my pronunciation, South Sea Island activist, a black feminist, a photographer, a radio broadcaster, an academic, a poet, and a performer. She's Kim's relative, and she is an example of the interconnections which Katerina raised at the beginning between Pacific Island and Indigenous Australians, about the interaction of Australia and the Pacific. It's a beautiful article, well-researched, well-written article, which is a model for the work that we hope will flourish now. I also, lastly, would like to give my good wishes to the workshop today. You don't need it. Your energy is suffice. And we've got today, three passionate women about, they're passionate about Australian South Sea Island history, identity, heritage. And I'm very pleased to meet Melinda and Kim and Imelda. And so I welcome you warmly. Thank you in anticipation. I'm so looking forward to the fruits of your collaboration, and I sit in awe of your energy and what you're producing. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and my name's Kim Kruger, and I'm very excited to be here with Melinda Mann and Imelda Miller today, and start off by acknowledging the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, and paying respects to them by following their law, look after the land, look after the people. This is the first time I've done something without notes, so this is going to be fun. Sadly, and I hope this is not too abrupt news for people in my family and the South Sea Islander community, but sadly we heard overnight that Auntie Lily Engstrom passed away. So we agreed to dedicate this workshop to her. Auntie Lily was, you'll see a picture of her in the presentation today. She was the last of the last of the generation of the what do you call it? First generation, thank you, of South Sea Islanders in our family. So we had people that came from the islands, and she was born here, and she was my grandfather's generation. So yeah, I thought it was important to acknowledge that the lived history of our people is, and the people that we'll be showing you are, they're connected to people that were living now. And she was a beautiful, lovely, lovely woman. So my condolences to her family, and I hope her family are travelling well at this time. So can I have the next slide, please? So we're all going to introduce ourselves, and we thought that we would do that through our families. So I'm going to go first. So as I said, my name's Kim Kruger. I'm a researcher and lecturer at Victoria University in Melbourne. So teaching in Indigenous studies and researching with Gary Foley's Aboriginal History Archive. And I'm also undertaking my PhD there, based on my mum, Patricia Corowa's career, her political career. So looking at the intersection of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and South Sea Islander political organisation as a starting point to think about a South Sea Islander philosophy, I guess, based on our on her work and other people in the community's work, and our collective biography and storytelling, which we'll see a bit of in a minute. And we thought it was important to talk about our genealogies and who we are and where we come from. So I thought I would share these pictures. So this is my mum and me and our little cousin Marco at Corowa Park in Chindra. So a few people in this room know that park. So Chindra's northern New South Wales. And this is mum's family here. So her mother and father and brothers and sisters. So mum, Patsy Corowa, is the daughter of Nana Eva Corowa, nay Yasso, and Arthur Corowa. They're holding the baby. And I forgot to ask Mum and Virg which cousins all the kids are, but then Mum's brothers and sisters are there. So Uncle Bud with Auntie Nell, his wife, Auntie Estelle and Auntie Lenore, and that's in Bowen in Queensland. And then above them, so Nana's parents, Topsy, Jack and Topsy Yasso. Topsy is nay Taters. So it's been wonderful, connecting with Melinda and Imelda, because we are all kind of related through those old people. And then this picture here is Karawa on the right and Nauta on the left, and they were two brothers that came from Isiai on Tanna in Vanuatu, and there's Auntie Lil there with the two old men. So she's first generation born here, and I believe that's around Brunswick Heads. So they're my South Sea Islander family, and I might hand over to Melda next.
Yeah. So my name's Imelda Miller. I'm a third and fourth generation Australian South Sea Islander, and we'll talk more about this identity and how we identify a little later. My family connections are to around Joscali and Mackay in Queensland. So that's on Durrumble country and Urubara country, and my family moves throughout that landscape, and is connected to both Kim and Melinda, and funnily enough, this is the first time we've come together, and I think it's actually pretty amazing that our paths have come to this place, because if you think about all the pieces of the puzzles that have to come together for us to be in this space at the same time, I think is pretty amazing. And it's such a privilege to be here. So, following on from Kim, this is my family, parts of my family, I should say. So this side, which would be your left-hand side, is on my mother's side of the family, I suppose. And I really like to not just talk about the past, but my current family as well, and how it's developing. So people understand that we're a living culture, living family, living experience, and that's a lot of what my work is around. So you can see that coloured photo of our family is the third and fourth generations. The children in those photos are now in their 30s. And if they're out there watching today, they're probably cringing. So, but that's what families are for. The top group photo, my great grandparents are in there, and you can see the photo next to it is them and their children, and Melinda and I connected through there. My grandmother and your great grandmother, is it? So. Sisters, we're still trying to work it out. It's a minefield, trust me, and I'm sure everybody out there appreciates that. And over on the left hand, and on my father's side, my mother's father's side, there's the Parter family. Unfortunately, we don't have great photos of our some of our families. So, and I think that's really important to speak about today as well. And so their absence in this photo is actually a bit on purpose. The other elder gentleman standing there on his own is my grandfather, Charlie Miller. He had 3 siblings, and I have connection with Kim through that side of the family. And his father actually, Charlie and Romus, they came from the island, so on my dad's side, we're third generation born. So, and as you can see in the photo, that's 2017, and that's a family photo of us. We feel like we don't get an opportunity to get together other than funerals these days. So, thanks to my cousin's children wanting to know more about our families, we've now started to create Family Day, Back to Family, and we come together once a year, and whoever can make it comes together, and we join together as a family, and everything we do, every generation, it has to be activities that we all can join in together. So, and I suppose my now job, I suppose, is as a curator, a part of Queensland Museum. I'm responsible for Pacific collections there. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about my work a little later, but I think that, because that is part of what's led me to this conversation today. Yeah. So I'll hand it over to Melinda.
So my name's Melinda Mann. I'm a Durrumble and South Sea Islander woman. And I've worked quite for about 10 years with in the university and the higher education sector, and stepped away from university world, but still as still an adjunct at Central Queensland University. And I've had the privilege of now being able to kind of work with community, and that was a part of my PhD kind of early career research aspiration, or I suppose, was to to spend all that time and invest all of that time within the institution or within the academy, knowing that I needed to spend time immediately afterwards in community to also kind of prove myself and learn from my elders in the community. So, Kim and Imelda have got a logic to the way that they've selected photos. I have nothing. I just found awesome photos of some of my old people. But I did want to point, I'll talk through all of them, but I think the most important photo up there is that middle, the corner one up the top there on the left, which is great-great-great-grandmother Nenabina, which Imelda and I have connection back to that woman. And so she was the daughter of a chief from Vanuatu when she was brought over. Her face was tattooed, her tongue was tattooed. She presided, when she came here, presided over a lot of decisions in the community, and especially marriages. She approved marriages, and she had lots and lots of children, and to different husbands. And so my great-great-grandfather, John Edmund, or his name was shortened to Edmund, but that he's in that picture as well. And then, so I guess, so we're talking about how many generations we are. So I'm maybe 5th or 6th generation from Nenabina, but this is my grandmother here, who was a first generation Australian-born South Sea Islander. Her father was taken from Gower Island and in Vanuatu. There's my amazing grandfather on that horse up there. His name was Cedric Walk-On. Everyone called him Wiki, and there's stuff written about him and his brothers, who were amazing horsemen. Specifically, the work that they've done, that they did as stockmen and as rodeo riders. And he's on one of his horses. I think that one was called Blue Eagle, and won a prize at the Rocky Show. So a great horseman. There's a picture of my great-grandmother, Rachel Brown. She married a walk-on, and there she is decorating a cake. I think that was in Joscali, that cake, and she would have been, so there was. I wanted to use that photo to talk about the way that South Sea Islander women were homemakers and took a lot of pride in creating homes, and especially in my community, which I count, I guess, as Joscali, and the way that they took care of community while the men were out west working. And this was post the cane cutting times. And this picture here was probably taken in the 60s in Joscali. My mother is the little girl in the picture with her hand on her mother, my grandmother, Elizabeth Edmund, who married Wiki Walk-On, so she became Betty Walk-On. And she is she's the daughter of John Edmund. So that's my South Sea Islander family bloodlines. So it was lovely to share all those. Yeah, I think I'm going into the next slide.
Yeah, so.
Which I'm going to stand up and do this bit. I'm just going to move to the podium. Yeah.
You're in the driver's seat now.
All right. I'm just going to stand up to do this bit. I think that it's really important to just take some time to talk about being on Aboriginal land, to have this discussion. And I want to thank Kim and Imelda for both of their introductions, and I just want to honour the work that you guys do, and the beautiful images that you showed of your family, and the way that we've collaborated to bring this presentation together. I think that the way that we've worked has really honoured our old people and our ancestors, but also the places that we've started this work. I'm going to read from my notes. So we want to position ourselves on Aboriginal lands for this workshop, and I want to make sure that we avoid referencing Aboriginal sovereignty in a way that thins out Aboriginality. So ethnic documentarian Dorothy Christian, in her piece of work called Visual Storywork for Indigenous Film, highlighted the importance of recognising the specificity of Indigenous nations as a way to refuse entrenchment of the colonial story of the settler population that denies Indigenous peoples' long history or long relationships with the land. And this point about refusing the colonial story of settlers is critical here. As South Sea Islanders, we are complex. We're neither settler nor visitor. We're the descendants of slaves. We refuse an anti-Indigenous colonial narrative in the telling of who we are and how we came to be here. So regardless of the lies that the colonisers tell themselves about their own nation's history in relation to both Indigenous and South Sea Islander slavery and other types of slavery. So we acknowledge that we've conducted this business across our individual nations of the continent's traditional and ongoing owners, and namely Wurundjeri, Yagara, Turrbal and Darumbal lands, and here today on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land. And paying homage though to unceded sovereign people and their lands, it's not sufficient, especially when the topic of discussion is biography and the biographies of people who were forced onto these lands for the purpose of white nation and empire building. And so as part of my introduction, and before we commence this workshop proper, I want to sit in this acknowledgement of unceded sovereignty for a minute or two to explain what it means to recognise who we are and where we are and whose lands we're on. Australian South Sea Islanders, past, present, and those that are yet to be born, exist here on Aboriginal lands and on islands throughout the Torres Strait. And regardless of the means by which our forebears came, South Sea Islanders have become the beneficiaries of lands and waters stolen from Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders. I'm reminded of my own South Sea Islander community and the land that was gifted to South Sea Islanders from Paul Alexander Josky, and this place is Joscalee. My great-great-grandfather Charles Brown, he married Susan Ober, and Susan Ober was one of 7 siblings brought from Ober Island, which is now known as Umbai. And Charles Brown was taken from Pentecost Island in Vanuatu in the mid-1800s, and we have family stories about how that old man had had scars at the bottom of his legs from the chains he wore. He worked in the sugar industry around Yeppoon, and this land here was handed down to my grandmother, who was in the previous photo, working on the cake, Rachel Brown, and then it was handed down to my grandfather, Cedric Wiki Walk-On, who was on the horse, and now my mother and her siblings own portions of this block of land, and it will soon be handed on to me, my siblings, and lots of cousins. But this land is Darumbal land. It's my father's land, and it's already mine. Aboriginal sovereignty reminds us that despite the gifting of land from slave owners to enslaved people, or how long South Sea Islanders have lived and worked on specific place, Aboriginal lands cannot be negotiated away to cover the sins of those who organised, participated and benefited from blackbirding. Ooh. Come on. Good. As an Aboriginal person and a South Sea Islander, I recognise my dual blackness as Aboriginal and as Melanesian. Can I have my water there?
Yeah.
I might just need a minute here just to have a sip, thank you. That's a beautiful Darumbal country in those photos, beautiful Joscalee. As an Aboriginal and South Sea Islander, I recognise my dual blackness as Aboriginal and as Melanesian. Thank you. As a descendant of Darumbal, Vanuatu and New Caledonian nations. As an Aboriginal and South Sea Islander person, I recognise that I, and people like me, including those who are Torres Strait Islanders as well, are the embodiment of the expansion of a violent empirical power that forced black people together on this continent. We exist as a result of the colonisation of the Black Pacific, Aboriginal people being the ancient ones of this region. We are a reminder of the racist, the capitalistic endeavours that drove the dispossession of black lands here, and which led to the dispossession of black islands there, all for this place, now known as Australia. And in my refusal of the settler narrative, I situate myself today through relationships with all my ancestors. I also acknowledge that as an Aboriginal person and grounded in my father's country, my country, Darmbununti, I am home. I was already here when those South Sea Islanders, when those South Sea Island grandparents arrived to bring me the rest of my world. But for my mother, and for many South Sea Islanders, belonging is not easy. Hovering between place as if suspended in time, perhaps floating somewhere across the Pacific, where those old Kanakas came from. Belonging neither here nor really there, but to each other. And in speaking of those Black Islands of the Pacific, we acknowledge that this work speaks of people from those places and that we are their descendants. I recognise the lands and waters of the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, the islands of Papua New Guinea and Kiribati, and the sovereignty of those Pacific nations. We position South Sea Islanders as Indigenous to the Pacific, estranged from native lands and waters, and dispossessed of languages and cultures, birthrights and religions. The enslavement and indenture of South Sea Islanders to expedite the growth and wealth of early agricultural industries, particularly in Queensland, occurred simultaneously with the dispersals, massacres and removals of Aboriginal people, and it weighs heavily on this work. We recognise that the violent practice of blackbirding South Sea Islanders to these lands as slaves is not separate from and nor the same as the massacres and dispossessions of Aboriginal people, but it is related to these atrocities. It is in this relatedness and relationship with these experiences of these lands that we honour the unceded sovereign nations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And as the descendants of enslaved people today, we do more than acknowledge the unceded sovereignty of First Nations people. We commit to undertaking any work we do to honour Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of all generations and their lands and waters, and in doing so know that we honour our own histories of relationship with their lands. In this moment of sharing, it is a privilege to be on lands of Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and we want this workshop to honour their love and their connection to this place. We're right now.
Lots of reactions are coming in online as well.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Melinda. That was incredible. And it is emotional work. And yeah, having our ancestors there with us in the introduction is important and probably helped bring the emotion out for you.
Sure did.
But yeah,
Yes.
I think that's a very good positioning, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. So we wanted to give you a little bit of what we're going to do. I don't know how we're going for time, but we'll just keep going. So yeah, we just thought we'd do a little bit of an outline of what we're going to cover. So we're going to, for those who have no idea who South Sea Islander people are, we're going to do a little 101 explainer. We're going to go into why it's important to do biography. We're going to go into a little bit of detail about writing for the dictionary. So yeah, and then something that's been coming up a lot for us in all our different workplaces is around the protocols of who has the right to tell somebody's story. And it's something that's coming up a lot for South Sea Islander communities, as there's a huge interest from academia now that those kind of global histories of slavery are now being connected to Queensland and South Sea Islander history. There's a lot of people outside of our communities wanting to research us. And then we thought we'd have a conversation, sort of open that up to talk to the people in the room, and hopefully, I'm not sure how we manage it, but on Zoom, about different experiences they've had of doing biography. And we especially want to hear from South Sea Islander people that are on the Zoom and in the room. And just about that managing and controlling our stories, asserting our ownership over those stories, and things that have gone well or best practice that we're trying to feed into the larger Oceania Working Group, and our own, and for the benefit of our communities. So that's what we're going to do. So now we'll hand over to Imelda.
Hi, I've got the controls now. So, I just wanted to start by saying thanks, Melinda, for positioning us here in this space, and with our work that we do in our community, and to do all the emotional, because I'm reminded that this is emotional work and it's traumatic as well, and to share this space with both you and Kim is pretty amazing, as I've previously said. But and I just want to also thank the Biography, the Australian Dictionary of Biographies, for bringing us together, and having this opportunity to talk with one another face to face is so important, and to help bring, I suppose, to talk about protocols, to talk about how we want to do the work we want to do. And I think that's really important, and I'm just so privileged to be in this space with both of you and with all of you in the room and online. So thank you so much. And thank you. I'd just like to also acknowledge the traditional owners and thank you for doing that on our behalf. So, and I'm always mindful that being in on these lands it's such a privilege, and those relationships that we have with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, the family, the families are interconnected in our experiences, and some not good, and some are great. So I'm just always mindful of that. But I thought I would just start with this slide today before we get into the 101, to position myself and my work in this space. So my work as a curator, I don't always get the opportunity to work on South Sea Islander material or on history, but when I do, my work as a curator has been around Australian South Sea Islander identity and creation of spaces where, around plantation material culture, archival documentation, and contemporary collections are interwoven with personal narratives and memories, to acknowledge a hidden history and to value an authentic Australian South Sea Islander voice, past, present and future. And I just thought I'd start with these couple of photos on your screen of some of the work that I do. People ask me why museums that I work in, and there's a part of me that's kind of orientated that way, the way that my brain thinks. But I feel that there's important work to do in archives, because these archives tell our stories, and as part of the work that I do, I think it's really important for us as a community to reclaim that space and to reclaim our narratives. And a big part of my work is actually not just me connecting to those collections, but bringing the community along to connect, because it's our stories as a collective. And the only way people are going to know what those stories are is with our knowledge. We're the experts, and and I think building up that profile that we are the experts in this field, no matter what anybody says. We know our families, we know our experiences. Some not so, but that's why we've got to come together and talk about it. So a lot of my work is, although I use the archives to bring people together, it's really, the archives are fantastic, but it's about bringing our people together to talk about our history, because we're so busy living our everyday lives that we don't actually get time to sit in our history and talk about our history to one another. And so I've just put a couple of photos up for here for you to have a look at. One is actually in the State Library. I did some work there a few years ago as part of an exhibition, and this is like what we call they call it a white gloves tour. It's when people wear white gloves to look at rare documentation and original documentation that's kept in the archives. Normally people don't get to see it. Down the bottom is an image from Joscali. Melinda just spoke about Joscali. And it's I'm all about getting community involved with whatever I do. And this is a digital story day. We're capturing some digital stories and just bringing people together. It was 40 degrees heat that day, but it's okay. People want to be involved. And the third picture, because I just thought, we're going to talk about these probably later in the day, but a recent trip I just did to Air, and this is an Air Community Day where I was doing an archaeological site as part of an ARC project. And this is a community day where we bring people out to the site to actually connect to the research and making sure that people are connecting in there with the research and being researchers as well. So I'll come back to that, but I just thought I'd just position myself a little bit more so you understand a little bit more about my interpretation of our history. I suppose that's what I'm going to say. Excuse me. So to get us started today, I just wanted to do a 101 about Australian South Island community experiences in this landscape. And due to the time frame, I'm just going to do an overview. And I'd also like to say that this particular history has many narratives, and I'm only skimming the surface. So, forgive me, or please add into the comments anything that you'd like to say. For those of you who aren't aware, Australian South Sea Islands is a distinct cultural group. Our community was recognised officially by the Commonwealth Government in 1994, followed by the Queensland Government in 2000. I'd also like to acknowledge Councillor Imelda Davis, who is in the room, because even up to recent times, Imelda, now in Sydney, has been fighting for recognition, the acknowledgement of our recognition in other areas, and I thank you for your work. So just touching on that, still today there is little known about this recognition and about Australia's forced enslavement of Pacific Islanders as plantation labourers between 1863 and 1904. Today, their descendants, Australian South Sea Islanders, continue to follow a path made by generations before us to articulate our history using our own words to change the narrative about South Sea Islander history and our communities and our lived experiences over the last 160 years. When people think of us, they usually think of sugar, but we are much more than just sugar. Our community, like many others, have made significant contributions to the development of this country. These narratives need to be more visible and accessible to the wider public and our own communities. I hope today we can shed some light on how the Australian Dictionary of Biographies can be a platform to highlight the achievements of some of our game changers in the Australian South Sea Islander community. Here in Australia, the South Sea Islander story is one that is very hidden and defined by a unique history of Australian South Sea Islanders and descendants of South Sea Islanders who were the backbone of Australia's sugar industry. Human trading of islanders started as early as 1884 in New South Wales. However, the main trafficking of South Sea Islanders was in Queensland between 1863 and 1904. Our ancestors, mainly from the island nations of Vanuatu and the Solomons, but also including New Caledonia, Fiji, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and the New Ireland and Milne Bay provinces of Papua New Guinea. There was over 62,000 people or contracts that were issued to South Sea Islanders, men, women and children. Many came here forced and others came by choice. particularly in the early stages, the practice of blackbirding, which is to coerce or force South Sea Islanders into cheap or unpaid labour in the cotton and sugar plantations in this place that we now call Australia. As I said, men, women and children work for long hours, for little money, if any money, and much less than the white labourers. Some were in slave conditions. They did backbreaking work, clearing the land of scrub, trees, rocks, ready for the planting of the sugar cane in tropical north heat of 40 degrees Celsius and in the winter of 3 degrees. Surviving this was no easy task. South Sea Islanders were exploited and discriminated against, and there was no or little protection from the work, the environment, and especially not the system. This was a new land, a new plantation, and a new power system. Islanders had little rights compared to that of other workers. Islanders came from different places, speaking different languages, and forced to live together under the control of the plantation labour system that controlled their daily lives, what they wore, where they worked, what they ate, and how they lived. South Sea Islanders were employed all along the Queensland coastline and into northern New South Wales on what they say indentured labour contracts. And they did this and stayed here for 40 odd years. South Sea Islanders worked around this landscape and crossed backwards and forwards to the Pacific. I think, and when we're thinking about it, that people, as I said, were coming from different islands and different countries, but what they were trying to do here as well was create a place, a community, and a family. And so in 1901, when there was some 10,000 South Sea Islanders living here and working here in Australia, they were not just working here, they were living here. They were making families, they were owning lands or gifted lands. They were making relationships. People intermarried into other islands. People were intermarrying with First Nations people living here. And they were moving along the coastline throughout the landscape. However, in 1901, the government of the day brought about the White Australia policy and the introduction of the Immigration Act, which was designed to stop non-European immigration into Australia. And it led to the mass deportation of South Sea Islanders. However, many islanders now sought to stay here in Queensland, fought to be granted exemption from moving. And I just wanted to make special mention of this because our ancestors were game changers. And some, because they were making families, and some were too old to go, you know, the circumstances had changed. And so they were fighting for rights for people who may not have had the rights. And I think it's really important to sort of, because I think thinking about what is an Australian South Sea Islanders, this is a really crucial point because this is what changes us, you know? It's these families and creating a community here. And I think that in that, and wanting to stay here, they were almost saying goodbye to an island life that they once knew. And therefore, loss of language, loss of dance, loss of culture. And I can't even imagine how that must have felt for them. But in that, they were thinking, I suppose, of future generations. And it was the likes of people, Alec Malakula, Henry Tongoa, and other members of the Australian Pacific Association, as well as members in Rockhampton, William Peterson, who were fighting and putting up petitions to fight against deportation of South Sea Islanders. And there are petitions with South Sea Islander names on it in the archives, which proves that people were fighting for some rights and fighting for a change. So during this time, many islanders were sent back to who weren't granted exemption were sent back to the islands. And those who remained here, some 1,200 to 1,500, that number is not really totally known because people hid in the bushes. We are the descendants of those who remain. And I think that is a really important point in our history and our identity. After deportation, those South Sea Islanders who remained, sorry, just got to find myself, because I always read my notes and then I don't want to read my notes. People who were staying here, I think they had to think about, and I think this is something we've talked about, you know, we're not from here, people went from here and they were no longer from there, or rather saying goodbye to there. They were forming little communities, you know, hidden on the outskirts of coastal towns, maybe reminiscent of a home they remembered from across the oceans. Places where they could maintain a more familiar, self-sufficient island lifestyle, including fishing, growing market gardens, boat making, carpentering, labouring, singing and playing music. Educating their they were educating their children on one hand, but they were banning them from learning the language on the other. And then, I suppose, creating a new cultural identity. Between 1910 and 1970, there is little documentary record of this new emerging community. People continued to face challenges. However, islanders were continuing to support their families by going to work, some taking their children, as well to help earn money. They were going to war, they were working in hospitals, pastoral industries, hospitals, and in maritime industries, etc. Later, people found work in railways, mines, education, even politics. Oops. Oops. Can I go to the next slide? Sorry, everybody. So for 90 years, descendants of our South Sea Islander ancestors and families moved throughout the landscape, settling communities along the eastern coastline and northern New South Wales and further across these lands. After decades of fighting, in 1994, the Commonwealth Government acknowledged the Australian South Sea Islander community as their own distinct cultural group. Actually, and the left-hand bottom picture is from the day in 25th of August 1994 in Canberra. A small contingent of our community went to see, and I actually remember them saying, we need to go, that this is a big occasion. And you know, when I think about it, and I look at people like Uncle Joe, Leo, and I wonder, like, what did it mean for them to wait that long to be recognised, to be seen as a cultural group, and that always sits in the back of my mind. Because it's because of them that I know who I am at an earlier age. And I'm very thankful for these, I suppose, game changers, these role models who took a risk and shone a light so that we could step in those footsteps. But now, 29 years on, and still little is known about the achievements and contributions of Australian South Sea Islanders have made to this country. It is overdue, but now is the time to continue the movement for visibility, starting with our South Sea Islander game changers and role models. It would be wonderful to think that one day Australian South Sea Islanders would be automatically in a conversation rather than to be considered afterwards. And I think today, you know, I think this is history making, I think this is game changing, and I look forward to the conversations that we're going to have today. So that's all I'm going to do. Thank you.
I guess what we wanted to do next was to really acknowledge the biography that's already out there, you know, that we are living in a continuum, and a lot of these are community histories, I guess, so fragments of a lost heritage, you know, there's community histories from Mackay, from Kanakatown, Rockhampton, And then there's sort of individual biographies, and this is Mackay too, the
Correct.
Garden of Memories. So, you know, and people who, everyone should know who Faith Bandler is. She wrote a biography of her father's experience, and it was, you know, about speaking back to this kind of narrative that slavery didn't exist, that the South Sea Island experience was not one of slavery, and these community histories and individual biographies are important in challenging that. And for me in my research it's important too, because it tells us who we are, like what our cultural values are as South Sea Islander people as well. And of course some of them are very connected to people here, that we'll hear a little bit more in some detail. But yeah, just to, you know, that we're not starting something new, storytelling and knowing our history, knowing our genealogies, that's all part of who we are, and it's important as part of our, we know who we are through our stories. So and these people have left significant information for us. And just as an example, this morning, Mel showed me this book, the South Sea Islanders Garden of Memories, which is about a tree planting project in Mackay. And I just was flicking through and opened it out to, you know, Charlie Miller, and it had information about who he was married to, Mary Romerd, who is part of my family, and it gave me a little bit of information that I didn't know. And I think also that's in the Lloydie Willie's book, History of Kanaka Town, which I haven't got my hands on yet, but I can't wait to as well. So yeah, this is our canon, I feel, you know, and there's more here that probably aren't represented, and would love to hear about more, because these are also where we pull out our role models and our game changers, to use Imelda's language. Is somebody able to move the slide, or should I get up and
How many slides do you have?
I don't know, heaps.
Heaps?
So I just wanted to go and look now at the Australian Dictionary of Biography, and I'm really thinking about this in terms of South Sea Islander people who are here attending the workshop. Just if you have not heard of it before, it is a dictionary that's published, but there's also a large web presence, and there's sort of different areas to it. And in preparing for, I'm part of the Oceania Working Group, so I've been sort of looking at the dictionary and trying to find South Sea Islander people in it, and using my various research terms, I came up with about 13 people. So I was just putting in family names, and there's, I think there's about 13 people in there that I could identify anyway. So a few have been written by Clive Moore, so the Fatnauna family, and you'll see these different sort of headings. So the blue ones are the official dictionary, and that means that they've been published, they're in print. And then the Indigenous directory, I think Katerina was talking about them being like a sister group to the Oceania Working Group, and I'm going to talk a bit more about what we can learn from them. And so people like Mabel, Edmund are in that part of the dictionary. And then People Australia, so Faith Bandler's in this section, which is sort of, how do you describe that?
Melanie can better describe a picture of People Australia.
There's 13,500 articles on the Australian Dictionary of Biography website, and we have 32,000 in whole on People Australia. So it's really our biographical register, and the dictionary is a very slow as well as conservative group, and we're only up to those who died between 1996 and 2000. And so any deaths that are outside the period that we're going to focus on, we're putting into People Australia.
Right. So did Al pick that up for the Zoom?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So trying to sum that up, The dictionary is quite conservative. They look at people from particular who've passed away in a particular period,
Yes.
and they're only up to 2000. So people like Auntie Faith are not yet eligible to be in the print version. So this is like a place where people are registered for when they are eligible to be in the print section. Gee, I learnt something today. But as you can see, there's not many South Sea Islander people in there. So, and of course, you know, acknowledging the shared. So there are a few Indigenous South Sea people in the Indigenous section, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. I think.
Next one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm gonna stand up again, and I'll just bring my tissue. Stop. I won't. No. I won't start that. No. I'm gonna talk about the life of Mabel Edmund, and as Kim pointed out before, the previous slide, her entry is in the dictionary, and it's in the Indigenous Australia section. Is that what it's called?
The Indigenous Australian Dictionary of Biography.
There we go. And her entry basically details her birth in 1930 in Rockhampton, her cultural heritage as both Aboriginal and Australian South Sea Islander, her education, where she attended 2 high schools in North Rockhampton, and one of those high schools is where my daughter, who's in the room, she attends that high school, which is just at kind of right on the border of, or on the edge of what we call what was known as Kanaka Town in Rockhampton. Her occupation as an autobiographer and a memorist, I learned that word when I read it. An Indigenous leader, an Indigenous right activist and supporter, a Labor Party organiser, local government councillor, and an artist. She was a member of the Order of Australia, and the key organisations that she worked for was the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Service, and I believe she helped to establish the Rockhampton branch of the Legal Service, Queensland Legal Service there, and the Aboriginal Loans Commission. So she was her political activism was around the Labor Party. She worked on properties as well, so in Rosedale and Bombandi, on Rosedale and Bombandi stations in Queensland, and she worked for the Livingston Shire Council. Livingston Shire Council has like the Yeppoon and Capricorn Coast areas, kind of to the west and north of, the east and north of Rockhampton. As an autobiographer, she wrote No Regrets, which was published by University of Queensland in 1992, and in 96 she published Hello Johnny, Stories of My Aboriginal and South Sea Islander Family. As an artist, she had her first exhibition at the Rockhampton Art Gallery during NAIDOC Week in 1987, and in the following year had another show at the Rockhampton Art Gallery. And then in 1989, another exhibition of her paintings was displayed at the the Walter Reed Community Arts Centre in Rockhampton, and an exhibition of her works at the Rockhampton Art Gallery in 2002 was entitled Life Has Been Good, The Art of Mabel Edmund. And in 2022, this year, in the opening of Rockhampton's new multi-million-dollar Museum of Art, her work on Joel Bina is exhibited in the inaugural exhibition of significant works from the Rockhampton Permanent Collection. And I want to just talk about biography and the way that biographies have or are created and defined and used in my community. And I'm choosing here to focus on Mabel Edmund because, well, we're from the same community and we're from the same family. Her entry in the ADB is based on the excerpts from her first self-writing, No Regrets, which I mentioned was published in 1992. And just in the context, I guess, of what was happening in 1992, that was the year the Mabel decision. So it was quite a political year for Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people especially. The collection of her biographical material continues to influence 30 years since her first publication and 13 years since her passing. And I expect that her works will become more influential over decades to come as her stories become reference points and sources of evidence to guide future generations. For personal context, Mabel Edmund is my grandfather's sister, my grandfather being one of the Johnnies that she wrote about in her second memoir, Hello Johnny, which there's a copy over here if you want to take a look later. We spent a lot of time with Auntie Mabel, who had a very special bond with my father, who was the son of her brother. Auntie Mabel took time to visit with us when we lived in the state. She was so much fun. She's just, she was one of those aunties you wanted to be around because something went wrong all the time. It was always funny. But she looked after us when my parents went out to work. And I have a very distinct memory of her addressing an issue of racism at my primary school when I was in grade 5. And in that time when I was sitting at the back of the classroom and this tiny little lady got up and addressed racism with the class, with the principal, who was this big Austrian guy. And I just remember thinking, I want to be like her. That's, So, she's always kind of inspired that in me. As I get older, she was the person I went to as I was deciding if I should go to university, because she was the only person I knew who knew what a university was. If I should get married, I'm pretty sure she told me not to. I remember distinctly her kind of hesitating when I asked her that question. She was right. No, get it. And then one of the very first people I brought my children to after they were born. But I want to respect that her legacy belongs to her children and her children's children, and that their ongoing work in our community has led to significant changes, particularly, you can see a few of them in that bottom photo, particularly in the advocacy for the rights for infrastructure for Aboriginal and South Sea Islander communities and reinstating names of Darringal places. And on this day today, right now back home, there's a significant handing back of a significant site which her family has really led the work on that. So what is particularly significant in the legacy of Auntie Mabel are her artistic works. Her works, which are mostly acrylics on canvas, feature land and waterscapes, animals, families, societies and non-human forms, representations of customary law and practices, images of everyday lives of Darringal people prior to colonisation, add depth to the self-biographical work of Auntie Mabel. Her paintings of slave ships arriving in Queensland loaded with human cargo position her as one of the very few Central Queensland artists, and perhaps the only artist, to paint some of that invasion and blackbirding history of the region. Through her style of art, not only does she do this, but she depicts this relationship between Aboriginal lands and these events. In the context of this discussion about biographies, I want to point out that autobiographies, or this act of self-writing, especially for Black people, is a process that involves family contributions and negotiating around the ownership of specific stories, and Imelda's talked a bit about that, and how they are retold, how they're allowed to be retold. The process of self-storying impacts not only family, but also the broader white community and how it knows itself, as well as Indigenous scholarship and Black activism. Distinguished Professor Aileen Moreton-Robinson, in her seminal text, Talking Up to the White Woman, Indigenous Women and Feminism, references the autobiography of Auntie Mabel several times in her chapter titled Telling It Straight. And similarly, Woodrow Noonuckle, acclaimed poet and storyteller, wrote of Auntie Mabel's life. Drawing from numerous self-writings by Indigenous women, Moreton-Robinson stated that since the 1970s, Indigenous women continue to write books about their lives and their families, their kin and community, who helped shape each herstory. She writes briefly on Auntie Mabel's experiences as an Aboriginal girl, woman, wife and mother, and as a granddaughter of a black-birded New Caledonian man. Moreton-Robinson points out Auntie Mabel's marriage into a large South Sea Islander family, her experiences of isolation and exclusion by other South Sea Islanders because of her mixed Aboriginal and South Sea Islander heritage, her work as a domestic servant and stockwoman, as well as Auntie Mabel's experiences of racism and her career as an artist. And the purpose of Morton Robinson's illumination shows how Indigenous women have, by their own hand, made themselves the subjects of their own writing. And in doing so, they have reduced the power of anthropological analysis by offering their own expert accounts of their humanness and humanity. This act of literary resistance is both personal and political, and as the colonial project on this continent continues to develop, the warning by Barry La Bellestia in 1991, that living black and writing about it can be seen as a process of political confrontation, really comes to fruition and makes complex the writing of black experiences. And we see how this manifests now with Indigenous and diasporic Pacific communities, where the politics of knowing has moved some away from lived experience based in relationality and accountability to positioning as the one or the only one. Professor Chelsea Wadigo, Mananjali and South Sea Islander woman, explains her reason to use self-storying as the basis of her 2020 book, Another Day in the Colony, when she stated that there is an increasing volume of Indigenous scholarship that involves the extraction of Indigenous experience in order to become the ultimate knower of it. All of these examples exact violence on black people, black communities and black consciousness because they are a colonising practice of discovery and of claiming something that doesn't belong to you yet or at all. So what I posit here is that in the collation of biographies, the objective should not be solely representation of South Sea Islanders in the dictionary, or who gets to determine this. The goal should be building a process situated in relational protocol that creates the opportunity to work with Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and South Sea Islander communities to recount the lives of South Sea Islander people. This approach moves the work from extractive to strategic, from one to everyone. It ensures the major beneficiary are South Sea Islander people collectively before anyone or anything else. It is also strategic because it refuses that colonial narrative for settler populations, as Dorothy Christian said, especially when there exists an even greater refusal by them to know their own history of slavery through that phenomenon of willful amnesia that Colin Tatz talks about. But perhaps even more importantly, a strategic approach to the collection of biographies for the ADB could entrench a deeper sense of South Sea Islander belonging, which is grounded in community-specific relationships and accountability to each other in the absence of geographical ancestral ties to this continent or to elsewhere. Building the capacity of South Sea Islander communities to create and hold biographies of their loved ones could and would be opportunities to reinforce relationality through those things that Morton Robinson says is how it's learnt: reciprocity, obligation, shared experiences, coexistence, cooperation and social memory. So I would argue that the additional layers of Annie Mabel's artistic contributions to her written biographical works increase the depth of her storytelling. Her breadth of works are key signposts that she has left for us to follow. One of these signposts is to be strategic in biographical endeavours. The work to add South Sea Islander entries to the ADB must be done with communities, and we must bring as many South Sea Islanders along in this process as possible. My last note about this incredible person, Annie Mabel Edmund, is a personal one. Her legacy has been a gift for people who, like me, are both Aboriginal and South Sea Islander. Her biographies show how we can exist as both. Growing up, I came from this Darumble family who lived and loved on country with no delineation between the land as country and us as human country. It was white people who told me I was black, but it was Annie Mabel who taught me I was black. Her legacy fuels the active fight for not only myself, but some of the staunchest Aboriginal and South Sea Islander mob I know to come from my community. Thank you.
Amazing again. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to turn to now about writing an entry for the dictionary, which was mentioned earlier. So I wrote an entry which is not yet published, but it's getting there, on my cousin Lisa Bellear. So that's a picture of us together. Lisa was a prolific photographer. She was a political activist, I should go back a bit more. So Lisa is a Gurnpool, Nunakul and South Sea Islander woman. Her family, this is where I should have had notes. You'll read all about it in the dictionary. Her grandmother and my grandfather are brother and sister, Auntie Sadie Bellear, née Korrowa, and my grandfather Arthur Korrowa, who you saw in the first, in my photos. Lisa was born in Melbourne, as was I, and in our family, in the Korrowa family, there's 4 people born in Melbourne, including my daughter. So we're a long way away from the rest of our family. And Lisa's mother, Auntie Binky, died when Lisa was very, very young, like a baby. And she was put into, she was at Berry Street, and she was adopted out to a white family against the wishes of the Bellear family. And then we met through the community, through the Aboriginal community, when I was 17 years old. We did not know about Lisa until we met her. And my relationship with Lisa is kind of foundational to all this work, because us being only a handful of people in Melbourne from our family, we were very close. We lived around the corner from each other. She gave me a job at Melbourne Uni. I worked at Melbourne Uni with her for many years, and we would do all our community events together. So she was very, we were in each lives a lot. You know, we'd be hanging out 3-4 days a week. Sadly, she passed away in 2006, so she was only 45 years old. It's almost, I don't know how long ago that is, 20 years almost. And which was devastating for all of us. She was a very prolific person. So she, after being adopted out, she came and found the Melbourne Aboriginal community. They helped her find her family back in the Tweed. And that was all done through genealogy experts in the community. You know, you go down to the pub in Fitzroy and there'd be old aunties sitting there, and they would connect, they knew they could work it out. So, and they did that right through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So she was adopted into a Torres Strait Islander family when they heard that her mother had passed away. And she became very active in the Aboriginal community in Melbourne and nationally. So she trained as, she qualified as a social worker at Melbourne Uni. Then she became the student liaison officer, created this amazing environment for Aboriginal people to enter a very privileged space. So she was very important in supporting, you know, some of our first Aboriginal lawyers, our first Aboriginal doctor in Victoria, all these significant people, game changers, and importantly bringing the community into, you know, this very privileged Melbourne University. It was just where, you know, the elite went to study. And she just broke it open and by bringing all those aunts out of the pub onto campus and telling people how to behave. So as I said, she passed away. She did a lot of different things. She was very interested in the arts. She was a community radio broadcaster. She had a radio show for over 20 years called Not Another Koori Show, because when they were developing the show, somebody at the radio station said, "Oh, not another Koori show." Like there was only 2, And she was like, right, I mean, she did it with Destiny Deacon and Janina Harding, and they were like, right, that's what we're going to call it. And that ran for over 20 years. But very, very involved politically, especially in Stolen Generations work. And since her passing, there's been a lot of commemoration of her. Just a really dynamic person who had fingers in lots of pies, but was very sort of non-assuming. Like, you know, people. She didn't. A lot of her work was unpaid, and often she didn't have any money. So she'd be riding around on her bike with all sorts of things. We've tried to capture that in this picture here. So one of the ways she's been commemorated is the City of Melbourne named a street after her. And that was a kind of amazing, funny thing, because they approached us about, we're going to name a street after Lisa, and it was through the Koori Women Mean Business and the Victorian Women's Trust. We're trying to get more women recognised in the life of the city, and they came up with a list of 50 Aboriginal women, included in a list of 100 women. And Lisa was the first person to be commemorated in that way. But then the City of Melbourne came back and said, but we can't use Bellear, because we can't call it Bellear Lane because there's a Bellear spelt different one, 10 kilometres away. It's like, okay. And I was like, well, can you call it Lisa Bellear Lane? And they said, well, we don't use first names. So it's like, we're going to make this, we're going to recognise this woman, but we're not going to name her. And so we came up with Warrior Woman Lane because that's a line from one of her poems. I'm sorry, I haven't even acknowledged she was a poet and a photographer. So they named the lane, and the sign was stolen about 4 times because everyone thinks of Xena Warrior Woman and all sorts of things. So we went back to them and said, we need to tell them who this warrior woman is. So so we included the poem. We had 2 artists. This is the work of Charlotte Allingham. Try and represent all of Lisa's interests and tell her story in the laneway. So it's kind of her South Sea Islander and her, feminist and Stolen Generations and her ties to the Torres Strait and to Black Power is all tried to be represented in the badges on her lapels there. And her poem is in there, and then some of her photos are in the bag, flying out of the bag, because that's what she was kind of chaotic, and she'd sort of rush around from place to place, and part of her thing was to take photos in community and give them back to community, like it was for community, it wasn't for other people. So and she was sort of writing her PhD about the practice of not erasing, she was looking at a lot of colonial photos that just said black boy or, Pickaninny or whatever, and a lot of her, or not acknowledging who an artist was with artefacts. So it was always about naming people in photos. So I worked on that for Lisa's, and we also worked on an exhibition of her photos. So she has 15,000 photos in a collection at the Koori Heritage Trust in Melbourne, and this is the catalogue from an exhibition we did of her work. And that image is at Camp Sovereignty in 2006, and she died in 2006. So this is some of her last work, and that's a picture of one of our family members, Robbie Corowa, who was the sacred fire. He brought the sacred fire from the embers from the Aboriginal embassy here in Canberra and brought them down to Camp Sovereignty, and was the sacred fire keeper through Camp Sovereignty, and that was him taking a copper through the fire. People, it's kind of interesting photo. But So that was sort of made 10 years after she passed away, and that was a really difficult process, you know, because we were all still grieving 10 years later, to write about her, but also kind of really aware that other people were writing her into the record and getting omitting things, or it not being how we understood her to be, so kind of misrepresenting her. So, so these are kind of biographical works, I guess. And then I might just point to this image here. So that the picture on the left is the cover of her poetry collection, edited by Sandra Phillips and published by UQP, and it's based on the titles from a Destiny Deacon image, Dreaming in Urban Areas. And I'm getting to the ADB, don't worry. So the picture next to it is the cover of one of Natalie Harkin's poetry collections. And Natalie Harkin is on the Indigenous working group for the Australian Dictionary of Biography. And getting to Lisa's entry in the dictionary, Natalie Harkin, who's a poet, recommended that I write a Lisa's entry. So it wasn't, I didn't approach the dictionary, the Indigenous Working Party approached me, and that was just through those community networks. So Natalie is part of the amazing group, the Unbound Collective from South Australia, and I got to meet her through the Australian Association of Pacific Studies, and you know, and then people just know from community who people are, and that's how it came about. So I might move on to the next slide. So writing this entry on Lisa, I guess, is drawing from the experiences of doing these two projects, and then being invited by the Indigenous Working Group through Natalie. So this is Lisa. And this was a short biography that was written by the Victorian Women's Trust, who got the City of Melbourne to name the lane for her. And I just wanted to go into a bit of the process, because I think there's some things that we can learn from the Indigenous Working Group that I found really helpful. So they basically provided a style guide, and it's not really onerous, it's just like, here are some suggestions of things to include, and it just helped me start writing the actual entry. So I just put in here some of the detail, this in the right hand lower corner, just a few of the things that they sort of outline, and one is that they adhere to the IATSIS ethics. So, you know, in research, that if you do anything with Aboriginal subject matter, people, material, you need to go through a proper ethics process that addresses, you know, things about informed consent and those sorts of things. So that, I think, is a really good thing for us to think about in terms of the Oceania Working Group. And then they just gave us sort of, you know, starting points, like the person's name, all the names that they go by, the clan and language group, their community, and then also to include family in the first kind of paragraph, which, you know, like significant people in her family. So in her case, it's her mother and father, like who they are, and then it might be other significant people. So for Lisa, for example, you know, her uncles are very famous, and they're not in the dictionary, like they're, you know, that was kind of, ooh, shouldn't they be in there before her? You know, her uncle was a judge, Bob Bellear, and her other uncle, Sol Bellear, was, you know, is a significant activist in the Aboriginal community. But that means that they're mentioned there, so then there'll be links later to those people, depending on if the family want that. So all those sorts of things just helped me get the first sort of draft out. And then I drew on all the things that I'd already written about Lisa. And I also read a lot about her. So she's very significant to a lot of Aboriginal feminist poets and writers. Like they're grateful to her for kind of smashing down a whole lot of doors about how they talk about themselves. She was just out there with her in her writing. So there's a lot of that's written about her. So, and I wanted to acknowledge that what she meant to this next generation of writers who are quite famous, like people like Ellen Van Neven and others. So, and then I wrote from our shared lived experience as well, like all the meetings she used to drag me to and all the fights she had and all that sort of stuff. And then part of that ethics process was that I wrote it and then I sent it to her family, because I'm not, her direct family. And that was a process of back and forth about what they wanted in and out, and in conjunction with the editor. So I guess in terms of the Indigenous working group, they actually have a grant to employ an editor. And that's something, again, the Oceania Working Group does not have, so we need to think about that process, because I found it very helpful to work with the editor, because they fact-checked everything that I referenced. And yeah, there was a little bit of back and forth with the family, and the editor made suggestions that I just pass straight to the family. And it was it's been a long process, I must say, and I think it's been good to be in the pandemic, to not have kind of tight deadlines on everything, because it's allowed that process with the family. So I just wanted to bring that to this workshop for us to think further through, because we want to talk about protocols and things. Just wanted to let people know it's kind of like it's the steps that are involved if it's going to be a peer-reviewed entry, right? So, yeah, that's it from me, I think. Oh, it's not it. Yes, I just wanted to talk about the significance. So this is another artwork in the laneway. It was meant to be temporary, but it's been there for like 3 years, so we're pretty happy. And there's like a QR code that goes through to more information and links to her collection, and you can listen to her radio piece, all sorts of things. Yeah, I guess the significance of writing Anna, I was so, honoured to be approached. But for me, it was significant to write from what I understand to be her worldview, like our shared worldview, because again, thinking about the kind of misrepresentations of her, that she would probably, one of the things that kind of irked me was that people said that she would have supported the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and I personally don't think she would have. So, she was a complex person, but I think she's more interested. If you think that her favourite sort of thing was being at Camp Sovereignty in 2006, I don't think she was interested in being included in the Australian Constitution. But anyway, so yeah, for me it was important that hopefully it reflects her worldview. And then, thinking about the role of the dictionary, and that it's used by schools, it's used by universities as a starting point for researching people. So, this is now an authoritative biography of Lisa that will be used by school students and so on. And touching on what Imelda was talking about, it's, we need to, increase our visibility as a community and not erase our people. And then the fact of doing the entry as a peer-reviewed entry means that I get a, you know, as a researcher, I have a publication credit. So I think it's a really great thing for, you know, emerging researchers to, you know, kind of get their chops writing these entries as a way to build up their publications. And yeah, we're giving, laying a bit of ground for people coming after us in terms of like what the old people did for us. Yeah. So sorry, that's the end of that section. Right, so how are we going for time?
10
minutes. Oh my goodness.
We were worried about 2
hours.
hours.
We can go a little bit over 2. There is food here as well. So
Sorry, people
it's in the tea
online.
room at the moment.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, we wanted to just kind of, I mean, we could touch really briefly on this
Yeah.
and then go to the next bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, can I just add, we'll have all afternoon as well.
Yes.
To return to anything that you might have to skip over. So don't
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
like anything's not going to be discussed.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll just touch on this, I guess, from all of our perspectives in different parts of our work. And I guess starting to think about getting more South Sea Islander communities to think about entries into the dictionaries, that we've come up with this whole protocol discussion about accessing material that's out there, who has the right to write the stories, write the biographies, all that sort of stuff, and maybe we will park that for the next section. I don't know, is there anything you want to say?
I mean, if there were people that had any comments or questions online, I'd love to
Yeah.
hear if anyone.
Yeah.
Most people here will, like Imelda, Lisa will be here in the afternoon as well.
Yeah.
So we could open it to those who won't be here for the working party
Yeah.
meeting if they want
Yeah.
to comment.
Yeah. Is there anything online?
No questions in particular.
Oh, yeah,
but
questions on that?
you can stop sharing the screen if you like and bring everyone in.
Oh, yes,
That would be
yes,
nice.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Let's
Oh,
open it
well,
up.
maybe
Open
before
it up so
that,
people
do you want
on-
to just go
just
to the
show
next
the next
slide?
slide, because
Okay.
that was sort of some prompts
Yeah,
too for
okay.
discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to talk to this, Imelda?
Oh, I think.
Sorry.
Hi.
No, you're right. I'm going to make up what that last slide said.
Let's talk
So I
about-
think we're talking about, you know, I think thinking about biography, thinking about identity, and a discussion actually between the three of us, so, and Imelda included, you know, there's another Imelda in the room, I'm not talking about myself, but about identity, because, you know, and what does that mean to us? And like even talking about the term Australian South Sea Islander, South Sea Islander, Kanaka, you know, and just talking about our different perspectives on identity, and that I'm sure out there other South Sea Islanders have, you know, other versions of that as well, and also, you know, regionality, and, you know, it's not just about that, it's like the communities where we come from, and then within that community there's more identity, and so we're really interested in discussing that, because I think by discussing this, perhaps it might bring out different themes that we might want to cover in the biography, or to get people start to thinking about people's biographies and those themes that we could cover, to actually broaden out that story, and across, you know, the generations and across experiences. So that's kind of where I was at with that. I don't know if we want to discuss it or park that for later, but definitely putting it out there for comment. Did you guys want to?
Yeah, well, we're hoping to just hear from people what they thought, what if there's biography projects, or what they think about it all, really, from South Sea Islander perspective.
Wow.
Well, there's a lot of
that's
people out there.
Yeah, so I've just
Remind.
asked them to put any comments or questions in the chat. Many people are just saying Vinaka, thank you, this is awesome. So glad to be here. This has been wonderful. Any from the room while we wait to see if there's any? Oh, there's Joy. And Amy. Oh, there's Romaine.
Yeah, I know. The video's
Yay!
Oh.
Ooh, don't do that. What's that?
Sorry, I think we do that again.
Maybe,
Yeah, so we have to check it.
But we've lost
like,
the
while
hour.
we've got everyone for a couple of minutes, I mean, we were talking about the term Australian South Sea Islander, and
Yes.
I mean, I'm from a, I suppose I was talking from a work perspective, as a curator, and someone who's trying to, I suppose, educate a wider audience, you know, and not, because when we're together, you know, we talk, we say South Sea, you know, and we know that. But when I talk to a wider audience, I'm talking Australian South Sea Islander, and I'm also saying South Sea Islander. But when I say South Sea Islander, I'm referring to original South Sea Islanders who come from the islands and before recognition. And then I start to talk about Australian South Sea Islander with Australian-born South Sea Islanders, and then from recognition. And that's more strategic, I suppose, because I am trying to get, I suppose, visibility and people understanding very quickly who we are. But when I'm with community, you know, that terminology changes. And yeah, so, but you know, we all had different views. Do you want to share?
I think one of the things, you know, in the last, I mean, it's probably happened for generations, but something that I noticed a lot more now is the way that South Sea Islander identity is allowed to be complex, and that we're allowed to kind of be okay with each other identifying differently. And I think that's really important. I think it's really healthy, because we've had even, like, I guess internally, just this kind of this consistent or just kind of one, you know, kind of mono identity about who we are. So I think it's great that we kind of push these and have these discussions about where Australia sits in the discussion of our identity. And Kim and I probably share the same kind of thing. I don't identify as Australian, either as an Aboriginal person or as a South Sea Islander person. And that's part of my resistance is to assimilation, is to always identify as a South Sea Islander. I'll refer to Australian South Sea Islanders kind of every now and then, but it is really about that resistance and you know, and now in community we hear a lot of young people now describing themselves as Kanakas, and you know, something that we never grew up with, being really allowed to use that term. But there's a beauty in who, you know, where that word comes from, and the people who are Kanaka people, and we are reclaiming that, and they reclaim it quite staunchly, and so I think, and that's, you know, back home we have a football carnival between two communities, Mackay, and we have to call it Mackay, we're not allowed to call it Mackay. So we call it Mackay and Rockhampton, and it's called the Kanaka Pride Cup. And you know, so I think those things are really these kind of markers in the way that we are evolving as a community, or are starting to allow ourselves to evolve as complex people with complex histories.
And that was one of that. See Kaya there. Thank you. Yeah, was her question about or reflections on reclaiming that the term Kanak. But yeah, but thinking that, you know, it comes from a particular place too. You know, I think of Kanaka Mali and like anyway, I had that same thing of old people seeing it as derogatory and not to use it. And I don't identify as Australian either. So I just use South Sea with like SOUCA. But yeah, I understand that. Well, I don't know about defining between, you know, people that came from home islands and the generations born here. I don't know. I see myself as everyone, so I don't mind being just South Sea. Yeah. Like that kind of thinking about, you know, different ways of understanding time and generations. Yeah.
And Melda.
Thanks so much, and incredible work, just overwhelmingly emotional. Congratulations, and it's an honour to be here. But I just, in talking about those terms of Kanaka, South Sea, and when I speak very strongly about this, it's also about educating governments, because the problem here is that we fall between the cracks. So when I'm using that particular term, it's for a purpose of educating those people that write the policies that affect us. And Australian South Sea Islander refers distinctly to that blackbirding era, 1847 to 1908 and beyond. But at the same time, is this decolonising in taking back? Because a lot of young people are getting Kanaka tattooed on them. I know Togo families do it a lot. And also the South Sea, I love that, you know, in decolonising and taking back what was ours. So how do we work on the protocols around that and how we use that? And yes, look, it's all about our narrative at the end of the day. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's, you know, that protocol around that, and I think the language that we use in the biography as well, and I'm just going to go back to the Kanaka Cup that you talked about, and because there's a real process actually around that. So, and when we were talked about these different names, you know, people reclaiming that, young people reclaiming these names, you know, from the community, like coming from a place of strength and power, and reclaiming that word in our own way. And when we do the Kanaka Cup, or when the community does the Kanaka Cup, there's a real process. They swap towns every year, and when the young people go to their towns, they meet the elders of that town. And there is a whole community day where they go to the important historical sites, and they learn about this. They connect with these old peoples in the different communities, and we make that connection between the families. And then the next year, you know, they do that in the next town, and they keep changing with the generations that keep coming through. So those connections keep getting made. And not only is this football game for males, they have females, they have adults, they have, you know, different, you know, teenagers. And I think it's a really powerful way of connecting. And I think, and so that Kanaka Cup is done on our own terms, and I think that's the thing, and reclaiming that and articulating that, and almost giving ourselves permission, or people permission to use that. And I think, you know, I talked to you guys about articulating our history, and I know in early work that I used to do, I remember somebody coming to one of the symposiums and hearing a whole, you know, South Sea Islander artists, Jasmine Togo, Brisbane, etc., talk about their identity and expressing that through their work. And this young person walked out and said to me, "Thank you for that. I'm a Torres Strait Islander, I've always identified at that, but now, after seeing this, I feel actually confident in identifying as both." And that's you know, I mean, throughout my work, just speaking from my own perspective, so all I've ever wanted was the freedom to let people be who they need to be, and be authentically themselves. I've got Amy's put up her ASSI stories there. If everyone wants to see a little bit more.
More than just a game. I think that might be an article on your Kanaka Company, I think.
I just wanted to ask, with the 1994 recognition and how that was passed, and the fact that Australian South Sea Islander was the term that came out of that. So that was consulted through the elders in the community, and how do we in all of this reclaiming and self-determination, how do we change that? How do we look at, because that was passed by Commonwealth obviously, on behalf of our elders. So how do we have that conversation, or do we just go forth? Does that make, I don't know.
Yeah,
No, I
it's
think
about
it's a great
acknowledging that
question.
that was the decision
That's
that
fair.
those elders made
Yes.
at that time. And we do need to have a discussion about that, I
Yeah.
think, if we're going to, I mean, but it's also being about pluralistic, I think, which Melinda sort of talked about.
Yeah.
You know, you can have more than one
Yeah.
way of
Yeah, and that was
identifying.
that thing about individual identity, community-specific identity, and collective identity. And that community-specific is really important because I'm not too sure what other Pacific, diaspora communities are like here, but we do have, there's a specific Bundaberg community, and there's a specific, the Gladstone South Island community, and the Mackay community, and even in Rocky we've got that, who's from Kanakatown and who's from Josley. So, these are parts of our history that are core to our identity, but also in how we relate and are accountable to each other. I know that's really that's a part of that yarn about identity and how we identify, because, it's very, like Mackay, it was, just 3 hours up the road, completely different to Rocky. That kind of thing. So it's, it's a very real, we were talking about that this morning, very real part of our identity is the communities that we come from.
And can I throw another thing in the mix? Sorry about this. You just inspired me.
No, it's great.
So how do we work better with our Vanuatu heads of mission, Solomon Islands, all those Pacific nations that we're speaking about that were affected? How does that, is that a part of the communities, the work that you do, and is that stuff that you consider?
Yeah, I mean, I just from my work.
I know we're already
I've primarily focused on Queensland because it's such a big community. You have the rain it, but I always think next steps is how to work there. But I mean, in identifying as well, this morning we had a conversation about how family members even identify, maybe not South Sea, but actually go back to home islands.
Yeah, and
I'm Vanuatu, I'm from Amber, and I'm from Tana, and so, so there's connection there, but it's about having a conversation, I suppose. Do you want to add to that?
Well, just the conversation I think I had with, if we're talking biography and permissions to use material, for example, that's archival, that also getting permission from families back in the islands. It's not just that if they're sharing stuff, that knowledge that belongs to them, it makes our work. We have to work with the people there to make sure we're following those protocols. Yeah, and that's a whole big conversation that we have to have.
Because Vanuatu actually offers, dual citizenship now. So what are we going to do if we want to take that opportunity?
And
we might all get deported. Let's go and commit crime and get
And I must say, in 2019, I did an exhibition called Plantation Voices, Contemporary Conversations with Australian South Sea Islanders. And during that exhibition, I'm very privileged to give a tour of the exhibition to a Vanuatu choir who came to visit. And it was sort of, I'll probably get emotional now, but it was through that, here we go. But it was through doing that tour with people with that choir, that when I was talking about it, I'm so used to talking to people from Australia. And so when I did that tour, I realised that in the middle of it, I realised when I was saying these are our ancestors, and I realised that was their ancestors as well. And so it was it was like I felt I had come full tide almost. I was washed back into the shore, getting ready to go back on a new tide, and to witness that. And I think that's part of the biography, is about witnessing. And I think that to have that moment with them, and we were all in tears because I think simultaneously we all realised we had the same ancestors, and here we are, same story but different sides of the tide, and so there is space for that conversation. So it's important.
Fantastic.
Yes, Lisa, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Just thinking about what you just mentioned, the Vanuatu choir, and like those deep ancestral connections, and the connections and the community building that happens around the Kanaka Cup. I always think about my time that I've spent in particularly Melanesian nations, and time I spent in the Solomons, and hearing songs by Melanesian people who still live on homelands about the ancestors that never came back. And I know that in Vanuatu there's a community that still sing a song about, Beware Australia, and they still sing it every day to this day. And I'm just thinking was also thinking about Melinda's point about, biography not being sufficient. And how do we capture all of that amazing richness in terms of like deep connection back to Melanesia, communities here? I don't expect you to answer that now. It's more just needed to kind of like just mention that, because like the histories in our songs as well, and our
That's
dances,
right.
not just written.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'll just say so really quickly. So, Katie, is that last year I got to have to talk with or host a panel of South Sea Islander people in Rocky there during South Sea Island Recognition Week, and that was a discussion we had about writing and about storytelling, and the vision we have for the future is to tell our stories and to create that kind of a platform for the next generation to kind of start from. And so biographies I think is part of that, but all of the different types of art forms, and I think art is key to talking about all the stuff that we can't write about, the stuff that words can't words can't capture, words kind of fail to adequately kind of tell the story, but art can.
That's a good place to end.
I think so.
Yeah, no, please stay. Wow. Yeah, I'm kind of speechless by all of this. It's so generous. It's such a gift to all of us. I'm so happy that we could help bring people together, and this is kind of what I do, and the people that I work with, Talei, Nick, we do all the time, in that we're here to make space, and we're here to make safe spaces to have these kinds of conversations, and part of our protocol is to work through which stories need to be told urgently, which conversations need to be had urgently. So I'm Banabin, I have some urgent conversations, but this conversation has to come first. So in my mind, there is a critical political method, one of solidarity and kinship, that has to be worked through before other voices become loud on the landscape, fighting for this, that, and the other. And there's so many things to fight for. Everybody's got something to fight for, something that's urgent, something that's awful, challenging, complicated, but also things to celebrate. But this is right way. This is the right way for me, in terms of what Pacific people can do, what Pacific Studies can do, what the Oceania Working Party of the Australian Dictionary of Biography can do, is to make and create those spaces for these kinds of conversations to happen. And I'm really grateful that you said yes I'm really grateful that you agreed to participate, because you don't have to. You know, you're busy, super busy. You've got so much going on. You've got your families, you've got community, you've got politics, you've got Kanaka Cup sport happening. So I don't take it for granted that, oh, we make a space and people show up. Like that's not the way I imagine and think about things. I think it is our role and responsibility as the Oceania Working Party of the Australian Dictionary of Biography to do the right thing and to do it, to make those spaces. So Vinaka Vaka Lebusara for feeling that you could share and do that emotional work with us, witnessing and being part of it. Thank you so much to Imelda for saying yes to come along as well, because once we made this space, I was like, oh, do you want to come along as well? Because we're making some spaces to have conversations, and you know, I know some of it's challenging and it's not always easy, and there's, like you said, pluralities, diversities and differences across South Sea Island, across Pacifica, across Aboriginal and Torres Strait. These are not homogenous categories, experiences, lives and histories. So yeah, I'm really touched and moved by the generosity and the beautiful stories that you shared of these lives that are so important, and I hope we can continue to work together, to work on the protocols, to work on guidelines, to connect to our sister working party, the Indigenous Working Party, and there are other working parties in the group as well. But thank you so much, and this just wraps up the part of today which involves everyone on Zoom. So we will continue to have this conversation face-to-face in smaller groups in the afternoon. But Imelda, did you want to say something as well?
I just wanted to congratulate the team and everybody here today, because this has been a long time coming since I met you back in 2010
Yes,
or whatever
I
it
know.
was. And you know, just to see this kind of determination through our Melanesian women, it's not to exclude by no means, but our voice is well overdue. So thank you to us.
Oh, thank you. Vinaka. And
Hello.
Ooh,
Hello.
hello.
Oh, hi, Commissioner.
Please go ahead. Thank you so much.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can't see you.
Okay. You can't see me. First of all, you have to excuse me. My connection is very bad in Brisbane, and it sounds like, and it feels like I'm back on the island.
There he is. Oh, look out!
And excuse my look, sorry. So I have to sit outside because my connection is very bad. My connection is very bad, and I have the sun straight in front of me, and I'll have to come and sit outside and try and have a bit of connection. It's very weird. I feel like I'm back on the island actually, but with very bad connection back in Vanuatu. But first of all, I would like to pay my respect to the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today here in Brisbane, and like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and future as well. I would also like to thank the very, very wonderful discussions that I am attending today. I think I'm very, very proud, extremely proud to be part of this today and come and listening to some very emotional stories from all of you. I think this is something that we need to do more often, to speak about our history, to speak about our truth, and to tell our truths to others as well. And I think it's so important that we have this platform today. And I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank all the organizers. I don't know all your name personally, but I feel very touched by what you've done today. And you certainly make Vanuatu very proud today to be part of your discussions. I know that you've been having a lot of discussions already, whether state-wise or with your own, I would say your own constituents, but also your own cities and councils and where you work. You've done amazing work across the country in terms of keeping the history of Australian South Sea Islanders alive. And as you know, Vanuatu, your story, your narratives, your history is also part of us, is also part of Vanuatu. And when we see you, everywhere I go in this country, I see people that look like me. I see familiar family names. I see people that, still remind me of where they come from. And it really touched me to hear all their stories, and especially to understand more and more their history here in Australia, especially how you come to this beautiful land, Aboriginal land, and also Torres Strait Islanders land as well, where you are welcomed into their community. We know the history was not easy, the way our ancestors were being taken home from our various islands in the Pacific, and especially Vanuatu to bring here to Australia. But I must say that we're very grateful and very privileged to the Aboriginal, to the custodian of this land, to welcome us here in Australia, and to help us live side by side with them all along. And also in terms of connecting their various people back to their communities back in Vanuatu. And you must have seen a lot of these on videos as well. I've seen some very, very emotional, heavy emotional videos of families, Australian South Sea families here in Australia, connecting back to their roots in Vanuatu. And I would also like to say that your history is our history, because because everywhere I go, I see myself in all different communities of Australian South Sea Islanders in this country. I was so emotional one day when I was in Sydney, and I was walking down the street to Circular Quay, and I saw and I think I saw a plate on the ground actually from the late Fake Bandit. I think this was very emotional for me to see that the island where she comes from, especially her father comes from that island, and that island is part of my province, and it's part of Namba province, and I feel very touched to see her name there. And I think it's something that my government will work strongly with the Australian government to make sure to push the narrative of the Australian South Sea Islanders recognition, not only here in Australia, but also back in our countries as well. And what we've been working on, and we've been working closely with other exhibitions as well in Canberra to make sure that the Pacific Step Up, the program, the Australian government Pacific Step Up program for the Pacific Island countries, whereby we said we call ourselves family, we come together as a family, and especially when we say in Fijian language, we say the Vuvale partnership. So this Vuvale partnership should start first and foremost with people-to-people connection, and Australian South Sea Islanders should be integral part of that Vuvale partnership, because these are our people. They connect us to this land. They connect us to this mighty land, mighty Aboriginal land in Australia. So I think it would be good for all of us to work together to make sure that we lobby the right people in the government, to make sure that we push forward to say that this Vuvale partnership that we're talking about, and I think in Fijian language it means family. So this family partnership that we have with Pacific Island countries should first and foremost start with the people-to-people connection. And people-to-people connection means also your people, our people, and meaning that we need to come together and connecting us back again, because without our history, I think we're nothing. And this history, whether it's painful or it's a beautiful history or whatever, we must talk about it. We must make sure that the whole world hear about our history. And we must also, when we talk about our history, we must also see how we can move forward, how we can uplift ourselves with the history that we have, how we can make sure that that history actually not only resounds back with where we come from, but also how do we leverage on that, making sure that we move forward. Because history and culture, I personally believe that history and culture are two fundamental core of the Pacific Island countries, but also for Vanuatu in that particular case, that it's a moving thing. History is not something that is stagnant, or culture is not something that is stagnant, but it's moving. It's moving with time. And so how do we work together to adapt that? And so I once again would like to thank all of you, and I'm looking forward. I'm sorry that I couldn't be in Canberra this time because I had to be here for some short notice visit, but I would definitely like to meet all of you once I travel across this country to come and sit with you and to work closely with you. And I'd also like to inform all our August panelists, but also our distinguished members on this Zoom call today, but also in Canberra, that Australian South Sea Islanders has always been a policy of foreign, has always been part of the foreign policy of the Vanuatu government. And we will work closely with you. We will always work with you. And the funny story that I always tell everybody, that when I applied for this job, one of the questions actually was about Australian South Sea Islanders. And that time I was sitting in Rome actually and eating my pasta. Never knew that one question would come around Australian South Sea Islanders. That the question specifically said, how would we make sure that we connect the Australian South Sea Islanders community in Australia with their land of origin, Vanuatu? How would you do that by representing Vanuatu in Australia? And so I had to come up with it. Thank goodness, Australian South Sea Islanders, I learned it in school because it's part of our school curriculum in primary school in Vanuatu. And so I had to dig deep to get some of this information and making sure that I put that forward. And I believe I succeeded a little bit, and some here in Australia. And again, thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. Wow. Was there a final quick comment from Joy? Was that right?
Yes.
Over to the OG original Kanaka, Joy Enomoto.
Aloha maika ko mahalo nui loa for such a beautiful and needed conversation. As you were saying, Kati, because Kanak comes from Kanaka Maoli, do you all, there's a couple of things. Do you all envision the new potential alliances because Kanak was sort of laid upon South Sea Islanders and laid upon Melanesian workers in this, and taken from us in this derogatory way, which is kind of gives this vision of how they thought of all of us. They took our word and they just basically, they made it a derogatory thing, and that's who we are, right? And so it was a deliberate sort of white supremacist move on their part to separate us between the North Pacific and the South Pacific. And then, but also there's very much an untold story of South Sea Islanders in Hawaii. There was a community of at least 300 that were about a block from Iolani Palace that has never been written about, spoken about, because basically it said, well, they didn't have South Sea Islanders in Hawaii, and that's just not true. And so revisiting those stories, I think, is incredible in terms of reconnecting us in a number of ways, because there were South Sea Islanders that were brought here and died here and have not been necessarily recognized or honored here, which is something that I find completely, I find this an obligation for myself for a variety of reasons, but also to educate Hawaiians on this, and bring Hawaiians back into more Pacific conversations beyond other Polynesian countries, right? So just putting that out there and just wondering how you see those connections.
Mahalo, Joy.
If I could just respond to what Joy's talking about, Joy, and thank you for raising that, because what we have also, yes, is those South Sea Islanders left in Levuka. We attended as a part of a forum, blackbirding. We put together a plenary in Fiji with Jasmine Togo Brisby and a number of other Tweedheads mob, because of the South Sea mob left in Levuka, also Samoa, and also Aboriginal people on Tongariki. I've met the 3rd and 4th generation people deported to Vanuatu, Aboriginal First Nations mob, and they're still trying to come back. So how to, very important, critical.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that a final comment, Lisa?
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Hey Joy, are you going to be in the next workshop?
If Joy's free, we can bring her in.
Yeah. Are you going to be in the
I
workshop?
can't be.
Yeah,
okay,
planned,
cool.
But I can't be.
Because I think, there's a conversation that needs to happen between all of us here, and the research that I've been doing, looking at I don't know if you call them South Islanders, but Melanesians that were taken to
Melanesian.
Samoa.
Yeah.
As well, and
Yeah.
that unacknowledged
Yeah,
history.
Mea Uli. Yeah.
Tamauli,
Tamauli, yeah.
Tiana Uli, but the ones that came back,
Mm.
there was some that did go back to the islands and were dislocated, disconnected, and
Yes.
so I want to know more about the Hawaiians, the South Sea Islanders in Hawaii, just because I think there's a lot of connections there. That's why can you come to the next workshop?
Okay, we will work on it. I know this has been amazing, and we should definitely take a break. So Joy, check your Facebook Messenger. But let's take a little break, and we will reconvene in this room in about 20 minutes or so. But I just want to say again, Vinaka Vaka Levu for everything, everyone. This has been profoundly amazing and rich. And so we'll farewell everyone on Zoom for now. And thank you so much again to the Vanuatu High Commissioner for your amazing words. Much appreciated. We will also take a group photo. So we'll take a couple of photos in this break as well, in front of the banners. We've got to do the things we need to do. So that's also happening in the break. And we have lovely photographer from the Australian Dictionary of Biography to help us out with that. So Vinaka Vaka Levu, there is a recording of everything. So please don't worry that anything has been lost. It has all been recorded. The Kampasin Rapa and Vinaka all. We will wrap up this part of the today's session for now.